Hey guys, welcome back. I am Templar, and welcome to the Order. And if any of y'all are new, welcome to the Order as well. Now, today as well, I'm going to be talking to y'all about the corruption in history. Now, why am I saying the corruption in history? Well, this can actually be said about the History Channel that I'm dealing with today, and as well comparing that to the old history type networks that we used to deal with before. Now, what am I supposed to be explaining that about? Well, it's kind of like this. Have any of y'all ever watched a, well, for example, war movie, a history movie, or including even a history series, and actually wondered if any of this is exactly true? Well, the thing is, I've actually seen hundreds of History Channel series and shows and movies all long before these modern ones. One of the most famous ones I pretty much know about is actually pretty much one of my favorites, which would have been Ancient Warriors that covered ancient history. But maybe I'm getting a little too ahead of myself. Let's actually refer to the good and the bad type shows. Now, here's the thing. I don't like to cover the bad ones first, but unfortunately I think I might need to. One of the most worst type of shows I could probably actually see in history series would actually have to be Vikings, Texas Rising, Aliens, and this is Ancient Aliens, Nightfall, Ice Road Truckers, Swamp People, XMen, and including Barbarians Rising. Now, that's the modern ones. Now, why do I say modern? Well, these are pretty much the most modern type series that we pretty much know as. Now, let me get to starting on saying why Vikings is part of the bad list. Now, I used to love Vikings growing up, but the problem is, the Vikings series that we know about from History Channel is extremely bad. It's gone from good and great to what the hell and why even bother. In fact, the History Channel series Vikings is extremely bad because of the fact it has Rollo killing off his own Viking brethren. It shows Ivar the Boneless fighting against his own brethren, which truly never truly happened. And the thing is, the entire series has gone from great until bad, as I said. And the problem is, it started getting like this sometime around the episode after the siege of Paris. Now, when we see the siege of Paris, or even before that, we see Athelstan, a known priest, have sex with a said woman or a princess, which never really happened. And the thing is, it just goes downhill from that from very on. If none of y'all ever seen that, here's the thing, you're lucky. I actually saw it, and I'm really wishing I could have plucked out my own eyeballs, and including cut off my own ears, in order not to see or hear the damn thing, because it was so bad. But another one that would probably take the case even worse would have been a one-season type series known as Texas Rising, which was extremely bad for Texans. Why? Here's the thing. It got so bad, I wouldn't even call it a History Channel series. It was so extremely bad from point A to point B. In fact, all part about it was extremely bad. It didn't even cover historical facts. It didn't even cover historical truths. It was just some sort of bullshit that some idiot director just placed on a script and said that it's history. It's like saying as though Ancient Aliens was historically accurate, which, if we all know, Ancient Aliens is not historically accurate. It's pretty much one of the most worst shows I could ever want to even talk about, which is why I'm not going to talk about it. But another type of problem about Texas Rising is the fact it's not even based in history. And the thing is, it shows the Texas Rangers during the time when Texas wasn't even a country yet. And as well, it even shows Native Americans as savages, when in truth, this entire series is extremely bad. And trust me, you don't want to watch it. It even shows Dean Smith as a Texas Ranger during the time of the war. When in truth, he was actually a Texas Ranger, but the thing, as I said, the Texas Rangers didn't exist until after the war, and it's after America and as well the rest of the world saw Texas as an independent nation for 10 years until it joined the United States. Now here's the thing though, why do I know Dean Smith? Here's the thing, I'm related to Dean Smith, and he was a messenger at the Alamo. And here's the thing though, if you can actually take a look at history books, Dean Smith died way long after it says in that little series. So if I can inform y'all, don't watch Texas Rising. But another show I would also have to say was extremely bad would be Nightfall. I had high hopes for this series, I really did, but Nightfall was just so bad. I couldn't even call this a series anymore. In fact, the series was extremely, really, really bad. Why do I say it was extremely bad? Here's the thing. From point A, it was extremely good with the Siege of Arca, or Acre, whatever you pronounce it as, but sometime after that, it just got bad and very bad. And I don't even know what the hell he was even relating to, because the problem is, it did not make any sense. And unfortunately, it doesn't even cover the historical facts that we do know that the Knights Templar did. And the problem is, it just makes up some myth about them, and it even shows that the Knights Templar had treasure, when in truth, it stated that King Philip never even got the treasure hoard because the Knights Templar got it out of the country. So, what was the point of making this series? I don't know, but let's just say it was extremely bad and leave it at that. Now, there are 3 series that I have to talk about that aren't even related to history. That would be Ice Road Truckers and Swamp People, and including XMen. Now, why these series? Why? Well, here's the thing. Let this leave in your head. Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel, Swamp People on the History Channel, and XMen on the History Channel. Here's the thing. What part of these 3 series do these even have related to history? Nothing. There is no historical facts. There is nothing in them that screams history. There is nothing in them that even says history. In fact, they don't even talk about history. They just talk about some idiots that's going across a frozen pond lake, cutting down a tree, or some guy swimming around with a bayou of gators. See my point? There's nothing related to them that covers history. And History Channel series, you pretty much should have realized that this show was a bad idea all from the beginning. And unfortunately, the only reason they put this on here was because they found it good for publicity and numbers. Problem is, though, a lot of people on the History Channel actually hate this show. In fact, a lot of people, as soon as they see it, click off of it. Now, that's saying something. And don't get me started on mountain people, which I don't even want to talk about. Now, let's get back to another type of History Channel series, which would be Barbarians Rising. Barbarians Rising, I thought was going to be a good show. Problem is, it wasn't. In fact, it didn't even cover the basis of all the ancient barbarian warriors. It didn't even cover Brennus, who sacked Rome and Greece. It didn't even cover Vercingetorix, who defended his home in Gaul. It didn't cover Cassavelius, or including Cornelius, that both faced off against a version of Caesar, one being Julius Caesar, the other one being Claudius Caesar. See my point? The only problem is, it even actually showed a supposed barbarian that wasn't even a barbarian, being Spartacus. And Spartacus wasn't even a barbarian. He was a loyal Roman servant. And that's saying something of how bad it is. Now, let me also talk about how bad it was. Now, why and how was it that bad? Here's the thing. It didn't even cover it correctly, and it didn't cover it accurately. In the process, it just made up stuff as it went along, and that's saying something. But 2 other shows that I could also include into this list would also be Lock and Load and Conquest. Now, these shows were part of the History Channel series group during the early 90s and including early 2000s. Problem is, by the late 90s and early 2000s, they were really bad. And the problem is, Lock and Load was extremely good, except for its little Blade episode. Now, here you already. Templar, what was the Blade episode supposed to cover? It was supposed to cover every type of weapon that was supposed to be with a blade, like arrows, or including with said weapons like a sword, a knife, or including even an axe. And the thing is, it didn't even do a very good job at that. Conquest was supposed to cover the type of warrior weapons, and it did not do a very good job. In fact, even the Metatron even talks of how bad it was, so that's saying something. In fact, take a look at this episode and see of how bad this little image here, and see how bad it is. But now, what other type of series are bad? Well, let's go to Troy, the series. Now, why is the Troy series in here? Here's the thing. Think of it like this. The Troy series was extremely bad because it's kicking Europeans out of their own history. You don't do that. It's like kicking Native Americans out of their history and replacing them with black people, which we all know doesn't make any damn sense. Or as well as kicking Asians out of their history and replacing them with Native Americans. See my point? Or putting Europeans in African history. It doesn't make any sense. In truth, it pisses off a lot of people. In fact, it's no wonder that the series got a 2-star rating. Now, another type of movies group would actually have to be the movie 300, and this would cover both of them. Now I hear you already, but Templar, I love the movie! Here's the thing, just because you love a movie doesn't mean it's historically accurate. In fact, I've seen the movies, and they are really bad in covering Greek history. In fact, it shows the Greeks pretty much barely bare-butt naked, and that's saying something. So, yeah, you can see where that's going wrong, and it even shows Persians using a weird big giant axe, and it shows, well, I don't even want to even pronounce of how bad it is, because it's covering everything about it pretty much very bad. And the thing is, it's showing only 300 Spartans, when in truth the Spartans had around 7 to 1,000 men. And that's not including in fact, the only reason it's known as 300 Spartans defended the pass is actually because at the very end of the battle, the last day of the battle, only 300 Spartans remained in order to actually hold off the last of the Persian invaders, so the rest of their allies of Greeks could actually, well, withdraw back to their homelands. So, yeah, you can see why this movie was both of these movies were extremely bad. Now, let's get into another type of movie, for example. That would be The Last Samurai. Now I hear you already. Templar, The Last Samurai was badass with Tom Cruise. Yeah, the thing is, though, there would be no way that there would be a white samurai warrior. In fact, it's actually stated that the guy that actually that Tom Cruise played as was actually kept and as well actually ransomed back to the Japanese people for their own military group. In fact, it's actually stated this actually happened against it. And as well, the guy that Tom Cruise played as was supposed to fight against the Japanese military up until the very end. And as well, he even stated they were very brave and commendable, but the problem is, he did not actually fight alongside them. So, yeah, this is kind of really stupid, and I don't think I need to talk anymore about it. Now, another type of series or movie we can also talk about would actually be the Kino of Heaven. Now, I didn't want to put this in here, but unfortunately I need to, because the fact is they show Templar soldiers fighting and killing innocent civilians for no damn reason. Now, other than that, the show does show some sort of historical accuracy here and there. Problem is, though, it doesn't do a very good job at it. In fact, it just goes off and on how either accurate it is or inaccurate it is. And the problem is, the show is very violent, the movie is very violent, I know. Problem is, the movie does have a slight bit of a problem. And that would be its inaccurate form. And the problem is, it actually doesn't not do a very good job at showing the Christians and Islamic forces during the time of the Crusades. Why? Well, here's the thing. During this point in time, it's actually stated the Christians, and including the Islamic armies, actually had deep respect for one another. Especially the Templars and the Islamic military, seeing as though both of them fought to the very end to defend their homeland. The only problem is that there are only two people in the entire, movie that actually you do have to look out for, and it would have been mostly Guy de Lusignan, who of which was the big problem. In fact, he was the one who caused the problem in the first place. In fact, there are many shows that actually talk about this a little more accurately. But now, let's go on to another movie that I don't like to inform you, but unfortunately I think I have to, which would be Braveheart. Now, I do like it that Mel Gibson made a Scottish film. I just don't like it that he didn't make it historically accurate. In fact, it shows Scottish warriors at this point in time wearing kilts instead of historical accurate type gear, of which the Outlaw King does a lot better job, but I'll get to that a little time later. In fact, Braveheart I did like because it did try its best to actually cover history. Problem is, it shows Scottish warriors wearing Pictish painting. And the thing is, Braveheart was this type of title for Robert the Bruce, not William Wallace. He was known as the Defender of Scotland. Yes, problem is, it doesn't do a very good job at describing the history of William Wallace in his form of title. So, yeah, that part I'm really disappointed about. Now, though, what other movies are there that are extremely bad? Well, unfortunately, this one I really don't like is the story of Beowulf. And this is like the 2013 or 14 movie, which was extremely bad. it was supposed to be of 3D animation. And the problem is about this 3D animation movie, it did not do a very good job. It actually was just plain bull crap. It showed Beowulf acting like not like a hero. It just showed him acting like some messed up playboy. While it showed, the king of the Dane, King Hrothgar, of acting like a, I don't want to say it, but unfortunately I think I might have to say it, like a big fat piece of shit. When in truth, that's not what they acted like. In fact, it didn't make any sense. And don't get me started what it made Grendel look like, because trust me, I can't say that out loud. So yeah, you could see of how bad this type of movie was. Now, another two movies would actually also have to be The Patriot. The Patriot I did like because it showed American type of, fight against the British military. And in truth, it did show about their resolve to fight against the overthrow of the British crown. Problem is, it did not do a very good job at trying to describe itself. In fact, history buffs did do a type of video on this that actually did make a little more information on it. But I'll describe them a little more later on. But now, another movie would also have to be the movie Fury. Why Fury? Well, here's the thing. Fury, how should I put this, did do a very good job at describing the historical type of conflicts during the time when American forces pushed into Germany. Problem is, it did not do a very good job of how they did it. In fact, it actually showed American soldiers killing off German surrendering POWs. Of which, no, they did not kill POWs. That was the Soviet Union, not the US military. I don't know who directed this film, but let's just say it was a very bad one at that. No offense to any of you who loved Fury, but the thing is, it did not do a historical accurate film design as it was meant to be so. So sorry, not sorry there. But now, let's get to another type of movie that did not end in a very, and it also ended on the bad list. This would actually be the newest movie known as The King. Why, I hear y'all right, but Templar, The King was very good. Here's the thing, if you were to look at the history of the supposed area that The King covered, the movie The King covers, here's the thing, there's a huge, massive problem. The King covers the Battle of Agincourt, and the thing is, the movie set doesn't even make it look anything remotely like the Battle of Agincourt. In fact, the Battle of Agincourt was stated to be in a flat plain. Now, they did do a good job at making it look as though the field was flat, or as well, pretty much does muddy, but that's about it. The thing is, though, it didn't do a very good job at actually showing of how the medieval archers actually would have fought. In fact, it doesn't even have any, spikes right in the front of the archers, which does not make any sense. And that's saying something. In fact, the movie The King is extremely bad when it comes to historical accuracy, including with the armor, in fact, the way they could have fought. That's saying something. But the thing is, the movie, they just wanted to cause bullshit that did not make any sense. And in fact, the Outlaw King did a lot better job at it because they had more heart to it. And that's saying something. While The King is supposed to be based off of the Shakespearean story, of which didn't do a very good job at all, and that's saying something. In fact, the show, if I wanted to actually say of how good it was, I wouldn't go any saying of how good it was at all. In fact, it's just made out of bullshit that I would just want to wipe with my own ass. Now, if I was to actually cover a historical version of the story of The King, here's the thing. I would do it a little better. In fact, I know a bunch of other YouTubers that actually do describe this a lot better more than me. So if y'all want to, check them out. But now, let's get into the good ones. Now, I'm going to put as Gladiator on between good and bad when it comes to the movie area. Why? Well, it's because of how Commodus dies. Mainly because Commodus didn't kill his own father, which is still left for debate on how his father really died. But the problem is, Gladiator kind of actually had a slight bit of a problem. One being the fact Gladiator kind of went a little too far at trying to prove something. One, it was trying to prove how bad, Commodus was. And don't get me wrong, Commodus was a very bad emperor. Problem is, he kind of loved the gladiatorial game so much he wanted to make him more violent. And the thing is, he kind of did. However, it stated he was assassinated in his bathtub. He wasn't killed in a Roman arena. So, yeah, but it does technically describe a good version of fact of how he technically killed off his best generals. And as well, he technically left the campaign of the Rhine River, or including the campaign for Germany. In fact, if he continued with his father's plan in taking over Germany, Roman Empire might have expanded even more out towards the rest of Europe. So, yeah, you can see why I put this in between. But now, let's get to some very good movies and series on the type of forms that I truly love because they're historically accurate. Now, let's actually go to, well, some modern history series, which would have been the Bible series, of which actually came out during the same time as the early Vikings series did. Of which actually did a very good job because they didn't want to piss off the people. And that's saying something. Another series would actually be the Hatfields and McCoys. Now, if none of y'all heard this series or this story, it's actually between two families who hated each other. Now, there are many versions of the story, whether or not it was because of a pig or because of a said Hatfield love of McCoy. As I said, there are many versions of the story that go down in history. And in fact, the Hatfields and McCoys hated each other. And the thing is, it did not end well for them. In fact, it does actually surprisingly cover historical fact, which that's saying something. However, this was before the Vikings, Texas Rising, or even Nightfall got involved, or even Barbarians Rising. So yeah, we could see the difference there. Now, another few series I can also talk about would actually have to be very surprising. One of these would actually have to be the series Pacific. Now, the Pacific actually covers historical forms of the Marine Corps divisions during the time of World War II. And this is surprising, the fact that it actually does cover historical facts from the Battle of Guadalcanal all the way leading up to pretty much, well, the invasion of Japan, or as we call it, the Battle of Okinawa, of which actually does show the gruesome fact of form that both sides actually played in the war, which the Japanese military actually had to use poisonous water or poisoning the water in order to actually win the war. In other words, this series does show a historical fact on how the Japanese fought back in order to resist the American overthrow of their country. But now, this can also be said in the series Band of Brothers, of which is extremely great because this is also made by the same group, and this is an HBO type series. And this was way back in the time. And in fact, it shows the 101st Airborne Division that would have actually fought during World War II. And in fact, it does show their complete military division from the invasion of, well, said D-Day, all the way leading up to the overthrow of the German military, or the Nazi Reich. And the thing is, it does a very good job at it. And surprising fact, actually, it manages to do its best in actually trying to, well, show the historical forms of conflict that these men would have seen. Now, even history buffs even talks about this, but I'll talk about them later. Now, another two type of series that actually I do love because they cover historical facts of the colonial period. Now, I hear you already. Templar, why the colonial period? What are these series? This would be Turn Washington Spies, and another one of my favorites, Outlander. Which, Outlander is extremely cool. If none of y'all seen that, I advise you to. It's actually already getting into its newest season. And the thing is, Turn Washington Spies have ended a while back, and this is from AMC. And the thing is, Turn Washington Spies actually covers the historical point of view of the American spy groups that actually fought back against the British military. The thing is, they do a very good job at it. And as well, Outlander actually covers the, well, pretty much a very good form of the Scottish history from the time, well, during way back before the, well, conflict of known as the Jacobite Uprising until sometime after. And the thing is, it does a very good job at it. And, well, pretty much because of this series, it's actually got many people inspired to look up the Battle of Culloden, and even some stones at the Battle of Culloden have been, well, cleaned up because of this said series. In fact, many people love this series because it does a very good job at it. Now, on to another type of movie, which we would cover the movie of Troy. Now, this is with Brad Pitt and including Orlando Bloom, of which these two characters actually do play a famous role. One being Achilles, the other one being Paris of Troy. And in fact, they do cover a said story. In fact, this is a lot better than the series. Why? Because at least they do their damn job at trying to make sure people are historically accurate to what they would have looked like. And the thing is, the series is extremely beautiful. Why? Because they actually have historical outlook of the armor and their type of said outfits that they would have worn. And it's no surprise of how great this series would have got. This movie would have gotten. In fact, the movie was historically accurate to its point A to point B average. And in fact, it's even been stated that the film is actually of a top 10 type of films of historical accuracy. And that's saying something. Now, let's go to another ancient Greek movie. The movie known as Alexander. And this one is actually surprisingly historically accurate. And in fact, actually was, also filmed with none other than Captain Dale Dye. If none of y'all know who Captain Dale Dye is, he's actually a famous American war hero who actually played in the movie Saving Private Ryan, of which will also be part of this list very soon. And as well, he was even a famous type of, history teacher on a type of show known as Conquerors, of which was historically accurate from point A to point B, but I'll get to that very later. Now, Captain Dale Dye actually informed many of the, characters in the movie of Alexander how to do the correct form of combat, and as well what they would have worn, and as well what they would have spoken like. And the thing is, that's how many of these movies back then were so accurate. And the surprising fact, Captain Dale Dye wanted to keep history the way it was. And that's why Alexander ranks the top list. Now, there is another type of film that I will be also covering also, which would be the movie Robin Hood, and this is with Russell Crowe. Now, it doesn't do a very good job at describing of how, Richard the Lionheart would have died, because Richard the Lionheart did die from a crossbow, but he didn't do it from a cook. He actually died from a said peasant boy who was running with a loaded crossbow and accidentally shot it when he fell on the ground. The crossbow bolt flew and, hit King Richard either in the throat or somewhere in his lungs. We're not told the true form and story. In fact, there are different points of view of how he would have truly gotten killed. But still, though, it is an historical form of how the Robin Hood tale actually is told. In fact, there is a slight bit of a documentary that actually talks about it, which is extremely cool. Now, that actually also brings me to another type of series or movie that would have been known as Rob Roy. Now, Rob Roy is actually one of my good famous films because it actually covers a Scottish hero, which would have actually stood up against corruption in the Scottish Highlands before the Jacobite uprising. And this would have been sometime after the fall of the Scottish government in 1707, and as which he still actually upheld the idealism of the Scottish tribal system, unlike the type of system that the English system was going with. He even stated that in one of his famous quotes, that the idealism of our forefathers is to understand the forms of which we are understand truth and justice, not to understand destruction and pain. Of which he does explain this, actually, in the film a little better because, it shows a very corrupt system of government with the British council members who actually want to try and take over many lands of Scotland. However, the Scottish people don't want that. But it does a very good job at explaining this. Now, why don't we go to another type of Russell Crowe film, Master and Commander, of which is supposed to be based off of the War of 1812 with American ships actually going after a British ship that keeps on taking American types, people from their own homeland. And in doing so, yes, I know, this sounds a little stupid, that, for example, isn't the movie supposed to be of a British naval ship going after a French? Well, yes, but, as I said, history buffs talks a little bit more about these type of films, but I'll talk about them a little later, as I said. But now, one of my most favorite films also that I do want to talk to you about would actually be the movie known as The Alamo, with Dennis Quaid. And in fact, this film actually does its best job at making sure it's historically accurate to point A to point B. In fact, it makes Texas Rising look like a piece of crap. And the thing is, that's because it was filmed in Texas by Texans, not by Hollywood. And that's actually saying something. In fact, Texans wanted to make sure the series, this type of movie, was historically accurate to point A to point B. Otherwise, the movie would not actually be making any sense. In fact, loads of Texans loved this movie because it showed their version, the historical version, of how the Alamo fell, of how the Battle of San Jacinto went. In fact, it actually showed of how many times the Texans actually hated, well, of why Texas actually hated the Mexican government, and kind of still does, for allowing its said military to massacre innocent people. In fact, this actually shows of why, well, none other than Santa Anna was hated by many people in Texas and Mexico, and of which was why he was viewed as, well, a dictator and known as the Napoleon of the West. But if none of y'all seen that, I will leave a link down below in the description for y'all of a type of scene. Now then, why don't we get to two more type of famous films, known as Gettysburg and Gods and Generals. However, I will leave another third one with this, known as Glory. And in fact, these three movies are extremely beautiful. Why? Well, here's the reason why. Gettysburg, Gods and Generals, and Glory were all filmed with reenactors covering the American Civil War. And in fact, literally, these are all reenactors pretty much playing their part. In fact, Morgan Freeman even stated that these men actually take great joy at making sure everything's historically accurate in the films. And this is in Glory. And in fact, Gettysburg was all filmed by reenactors. Literally, no CGI needed. And that's saying something. This was all done by reenactors doing a reenactment type film from point A to point B. Same can be said about Gods and Generals, of which, if none of you all know what Gods and Generals is, it's mainly the story of none other than Stonewall Jackson. However, let's get to another type of film. This would have actually been filmed and directed by none other Antonio Banderas. Now, if none of y'all know who Antonio Banderas is, here's the thing. I advise y'all to either see The 13th Warrior or including a Spy Kids film, or probably even one of the old Hispanic, I want to say, Robin Hoods. I guess that's the correct term, but I can't say. Anyways, Antonio Banderas actually made this film extremely good because it's about Pancho Villa. And it shows his faults and his, well, his greatest aspects about Pancho Villa during the time of his rise to power, as well what he was fighting against. In fact, Pancho Villa, if you all don't know, was actually a famous hero in many Spanish legends. And in fact, he actually fought against the corrupt government at the time, of which many people don't actually understand. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie is extremely good, but the problem is, it has some inaccuracies that don't make any sense, but I'll probably have to leave history buffs with that. As which, a lot of y'all might want to see the film if none of y'all have ever seen it. In fact, it does cover a type of story of a film that actually did cover Pancho Villa. However, the film has never been found to this day. But now, why don't we go to another type of rebellious type film, known as Defiance. Defiance is actually about a famous group of Jews during the time of the war against, well, Adolf Hitler. Or as we call it, the war against Warsaw. Of which, if none of y'all know in part in history, this was technically during the time when the people of the Jewish communities of, well, Poland were being attacked by both the Soviet Union and the Germans. In fact, this was an extremely gruesome conflict that pretty much in the early years. And in fact, these people known as the, well, Berezutskis were actually fighting against, well, the Stalinist movement and including the German movement. However, pretty much they were mostly fighting against the Germans in the early years. And in fact, into the process, started fighting with the Soviets against the Germans. Why? Well, because, if we all know about in history books, the Germans weren't so, or should I say the Nazis weren't so, well, polite against the Jews. So, yeah, there's a reason why. But in fact, the film is extremely accurate to its point of view. And in fact, it does cover historical forms of which the people of the Jewish community of Poland actually suffered from the Germans. So I advise you all to actually see this film and see why many people actually fought against the Nazi Germans during World War II. But another version I could also talk about of World War II would actually be one of my favorites. Would actually be Enemy at the Gates. If none of y'all have seen this film, here's the thing. This covers the type of time during a conflict in the siege of Stalingrad. Now, if y'all don't know what the Battle of Stalingrad was about, it's technically a massive conflict of which the people of the Soviet Union were stopping the Germans from crossing the Volga River and into the rich oil lands of the Soviet Union. But in doing so, a famous soldier, a sniper, came around, a man known as Vasily Zaitsev, of which this is actually what the film was about. In fact, it does a very good job at actually describing the warfare in World War II, especially during the time in Stalingrad, which both sides actually dealt with many types of sniper-type military blows. And the thing is, it was a massacre for the Soviet Union military. In fact, the Soviets actually massacred many of their own soldiers. In fact, this has actually been an Academy Award winner for a long time, actually. And in fact, it's actually been rated a 5-star rating for how historically accurate the Battle of Stalingrad was, which that's saying something. Now, another type of film I could also cover would even be the movie Pearl Harbor. This is actually surprisingly historically accurate to its point in general. And the thing is, it does its best to actually cover the time before this attack on Pearl Harbor and sometime after the Doolittle raid, in which it does a very good job at showing of how they actually wanted to strike back against the Japanese for attacking them. If none of y'all understand this, pretty much the conflict didn't start between America and Japan until after the attack on Pearl Harbor, of which the Japanese believed that America would surrender immediately and not be part of the war. Problem is, they didn't think that part through. In fact, even none other than the famous Admiral Yamamoto even stated that he feared that they have just woken the sleeping giant that was America, in which he was correct. In fact, the film does cover a historical accuracy to its point. In fact, it does show drama and romance, but it does show a lot of accuracy, which many Americans actually saw during the time in the war. Now, why don't we get to another type of film that has been lost to history, and that would be Days of Glory. Days of Glory is a very good film. Thing is, though, it's not remembered to be actually a good film. In fact, it's pretty much a foreign film. It's all spoken in Arabic and including French. That's because it covers a type of group in history that would have been the Moroccan division. Or, I hear you already, Templar, that's actually a very good sound cooling type group. The Moroccan division, yeah! Here's the thing, you might want to actually rethink that before you actually start speaking it out loud, because the Moroccan division actually went through the most gruesome conflicts during World War II. And these men fought for France, and here's the thing, they are actually forgotten. In fact, the only time you actually hear about them is either in this movie or in a video game called Battlefield V, or Battlefield 5 as some people pronounce it as. Now, here's the thing though, Days of Glory does show these men actually fighting for a country, that of which they were never born in. A country, that of which their country was now pretty much colonized by. And the thing is, these men fought for an ideal dream to be recognized. However, they are still forgotten to this day. Of which I will leave links for y'all, as I said, down below if none of y'all have ever seen this film. Now, another type of movie we can even talk about that I did describe a little while ago would actually be Saving Private Ryan. In fact, this movie actually does show the gruesome scenes of war during World War II that we actually do see on the battle during the time of D-Day. And in fact, the Massacre of D-Day as it was known as. In fact, the movie actually does show a very gruesome part of which American soldiers actually had to face during World War II. And the thing is, it actually does show what actually happened in France during that timeline. However, even Captain Dale Dye, who actually is viewed as a colonel in the series, and none of y'all actually ever see him, here's the thing, he's technically that colonel that you see at the end of the opening scene when they're back with Tom Hanks actually talking with him. So yeah, that's actually the most famous type of scene with him in it. And the thing is, Captain Dale Dye actually does a very good point of actually showing of how the war or the battle would have gone during the time of D-Day. And the thing is, he actually did his part very well. Now then, why don't we talk about another World War II movie, called Valkyrie. Valkyrie is pretty much one of my favorite Tom Cruise films. Reason being, it actually does a very good job at actually showing the trying to kill Adolf Hitler. Why? Well, here's the thing. It did its part very well at actually covering the historical form of which the, well, conspirators actually did try. However, it did not actually show one part, well, the death of General Rommel, of which it's actually stated that Rommel was actually part of the type of plot, but many people say that he wasn't. I don't know whether or not that's true or not, I'm just going off what I'm told. But it's stated that Rommel would only act in the defense of Germany. In fact, he even stated, I will not actually take part in this type of offensive unless Adolf Hitler would die. In fact, he even stated that he's not trying to kill the Fuhrer. In fact, he wanted to defend Germany only. So that's saying something. Now, another type of movie we can even talk about would be A Bridge Too Far. Now, this is pretty much one of my favorite World War II films because it has none other than Sean Connery. In fact, Sean Connery, who plays in it, actually covers a British officer at the time. And the thing is, this movie actually is surprisingly accurate, and it does show the do's and don'ts that Montgomery played during World War II. In fact, if none of you know what Montgomery was, he was kind of a big giant idiot who actually got millions, pretty much hundreds of thousands of his own troops and Allied troops killed. In fact, we can see this from North Africa till technically his defeat at, well, Remagen Bridge. And the thing is, Montgomery wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. It's actually stated he took credit for type of victories which he never actually completely made. He stated he took, part of northern France all by himself, when in truth, he took weakened positions and sacrificed hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The same can be said at, well, as I stated, at Holland, or as some of you might call it Holland, some of you might call it the Netherlands. It's about the same thing. And as well, even in North Africa, of which this movie does show a historical accuracy of how bad Montgomery's tactics were, and as well of his idealism of completely winning the war by Christmas. However, it did not do as well as he planned. So, yeah, don't get me wrong, Montgomery was a good general, but not a very good general as he is described to be. In fact, he kind of did cause a lot of problems when there were none. So, you can see why. But if none of you understand why, here's the thing. See the movie A Bridge Too Far and you'll see why. Now, another World War II film we could talk about would be actually Windtalkers. Why Windtalkers? Well, Windtalkers actually shows of the conflicts that many Native American soldiers had to deal with during World War II. In fact, these Native American soldiers, known as the Navajo, who actually spoke in a code form that the Japanese did not understand. In fact, because of them, we won World War II, especially at the Battle of Saipan. Now, here's the thing though, the Japanese wanted that code, and in fact, they would do whatever it took to get it. In fact, they would even kill the soldier by torture, of which actually does show a historical form of what the Japanese military did to prisoners. In fact, the Japanese were not very good with prisoners. In fact, they committed massive war crimes. In fact, the movie Great Raid actually does show this a little better, but you'll get my point. Now, why don't we go back for a little way from that and actually go to another series, as I stated before, the Captain They'll Die, known as Conquerors. Conquerors was extremely great. Why? Because it did its job at performing historical accuracy. And in fact, it wanted to talk about historical accuracy to the very point. In fact, it even talked about the Battle of Hastings and Stamford Bridge, or including El Cid and many others. He even talked about Julius Caesar and many other great heroes. And that's kind of impressive if you ask me. Now, what about another movie you can talk about? Well, we can also talk about the movie Waterloo, of which actually was done with no CGI whatsoever. And the thing is, it did a very great job at it. In fact, it's actually stated to be one of the most famous films in history. And the thing is, it did a bang-up job at making sure it was historically accurate to the point. Now though, what other movies were there? Well, we can also talk about Black Hawk Down and We Were Soldiers, of which actually do show historical forms of combat. Now, Mel Gibson did a very good job of We Were Soldiers, especially talking about the Vietnam War. Why the Vietnam War? Well, the Vietnam War as we know it was actually a gruesome time for many American soldiers. And in fact, this kind of film I even know about mostly because of my grandfather, who actually was in Vietnam. In fact, he was part of the 1st Cavalry, or known as the Air Cav, during the Vietnam War, as they were mostly famous for. It's actually stated that he and his men actually did get under fire, and the thing is, in the movie We Were Soldiers actually does show a historical form of which these men actually went through, especially many American Vietnam veterans that actually saw the conflict. And in fact, we do see the opening scene being with the French Foreign Legion getting ambushed by North Vietnamese forces, or in this case, Vietnamese freedom fighters, or early Viet Cong soldiers. So yeah, this is kind of why it was kind of famous. However, the movie Black Hawk Down does cover the major form of the American U.S. Rangers and Delta Force Division groups, including UN Peace Council groups, trying to end the type of corrupt governments of warlords in, well, the region known as Somalia. If none of you all know what Somalia is, it's that type of Cape of region that we actually know of as a major hub for pirates, and of which the Somalian pirates are extremely gruesome because that's actually where they kind of got it from. In fact, Somalian pirates are the same guys that actually fought in the movie Black Hawk Down. Or in this case, they were those type of people that fought in the area known as Mogadishu Crisis, and of which warlords were pretty much murdering innocent people. And in fact, Somalia has still not actually, well, gone back the way it was. In fact, it's nicknamed the region of the Wild West for a reason. Now though, why don't we get to some more accurate series, or as well, type of series on the History Channel and other type of series from other groups that actually talk about history in their series groups. In fact, 2 of these series would actually be from the Science Network, or the Science Channel, whatever you want to pronounce it as, of which would be What Unearthed and Unearthed. Now, What Unearthed and Unearthed are extremely cool because they actually do talk about history. In fact, the What Unearthed actually uses satellite groups, of which actually point down from the said region of, well, upon the Earth, and actually try to understand what these markings are on the Earth. In fact, they even gone as far as talking about Stonehenge, or including even the Eye of Sahara, and many other type of points in history. In fact, they do their best at actually covering some said regions. In fact, some lost civilizations that we do not see with our own eyes here on the ground, but from space. And that is beautiful how they do that. Now, Unearthed actually talks about more general topics. In fact, they've already recently talked about a Viking dead in the Cyprus region, or including even the city of Troy, or even most famous of Machu Picchu, the Incans, the Aztecs. They talk about everything. In fact, they go through an unearthed type cycle. In fact, they even talked about the Battle of Stirling Bridge, which was beautifully done, if you ask me. In fact, they actually talk about this to the truest point by unearthing the said regions below the Earth. If y'all don't know what it is, I will leave links down below for y'all, so that way y'all can get interested in the type of series. But now, why don't we get to another type of group? Well, this one is known as The Last Kingdom. Now, if none of y'all have ever heard of The Last Kingdom, this type of series is supposed to cover the said regions during the time of, well, I want to say the Danelaw over England. And the thing is, it actually does a lot better job than Vikings does. Even though it does make it a little hard to believe because of, well, I want to say rectangular shield walls or whatever. But the thing is, it does try its best to actually do historical accuracy. It does to actually make it look more historical accurate between the Danes and, well, the Saxons. And the thing is, it actually did its job at making best of with King Alfred actually appearing a little more correct to his age limit of what he would have been as king than Vikings does, which that's saying something. But now, enough about that one. How about we go into the 90s version of the History Channel? Now, this I want to talk about most because the 90s version of History Channel was extremely great. In fact, the early 2000s, extremely great because they got history the correct way. Now, what did they get? Well, here's the thing. If none of y'all have ever heard of these series, I will leave links down below for y'all. Now, one of these would actually be Modern Marvels. Why Modern Marvels? Modern Marvels actually does talk about ancient type cult, or pretty much of ancient technology that we today still modern use. In fact, Modern Marvels actually even had an episode known as Barbarian Tech, of which did cover the ancient Celtic sword. It even actually talked about other type of things, such as the crane, or it even talks about how you make candy and how it started off. The thing is, it talks about ancient marvels that we today still use, and the thing is, of how it first started. That is actually kind of impressive, comparing that to the modern History Channel that doesn't pretty much show this show anymore. Now, another show I can also talk about would actually be America Unearthed. Oh, actually, this show does talk about a lot of regions in America that we today actually might start believing that America is a lot older in its cultures than we still today think. In fact, it even talked about the Templars in America. It even talked about a type of group in America, or including the Incas, the Aztecs. In fact, it does a very good job at talking about it. In fact, I will hopefully try and find an episode on YouTube, or even a trailer for it on YouTube, for y'all to understand my point. But now, two of these series I do want to talk about would be Barbarians and Rome, Rise and Fall of an Empire. Why these two? Because these two were created by the same group. In fact, first was Rome, Rise and Fall of an Empire, which actually talked of the very beginning from the Roman Republic, or should I say the very late Roman Republic, to the fall of the empire. In fact, it shows very great heroes such as Constantine or Julius Caesar, Augustus. It even shows Claudius and including even Nero. And the thing is, it shows very great conflicts such as the Teutoburg Forest or even the 3rd century crisis. Or it even talks about the invasion of Britannia, the conflict in Gaul. It shows many type of conflicts. It even shows the civil wars that Rome went through. And then they made the very series called Barbarians. In fact, Barbarians talks about the said cultures. It even talks about the Saxons, of how they conquered Britain. It talks about the Celts. It talks about the Franks, of how they conquered Gaul. It talks about the Goths, the Vandals, and even the Huns. And that's really impressive. Now, another group that I can also talk about would also have to be Civil War journals. Why Civil War journals? Here's the thing. Civil War journals talks about the American Civil War to its historical points. And they do a very good job because they go through the journals of the American Civil War and talk about them. In fact, they do a very good job at it. And in fact, they even talk about the flag bearers. They talk about the generals. In fact, that's actually saying something of how great that series was. In fact, it was on for about 3 seasons. And that's saying something. In fact, it talks about them very directly and makes them, well, us understand history a little bit more about the American Civil War than we do today. And unfortunately, the only reason they got rid of it was because it was sensitive. If it was that sensitive, then it would have been gotten rid of a long time ago. But the thing is, it was really good. In fact, History Channel was nicknamed the World War II channel because it showed mainly a lot of shows covering World War II. Thing is, it didn't just cover World War II, it covered a lot more than that. Problem is, the Modern History Channel series is very bad. But yeah, you see my point though. Now, another show would also have to be Liberties Kids. Why Liberties Kids? Well, Liberties Kids used to show on a type of kids network that actually did talk about history. In fact, Liberties Kids talked about the American Revolution in the eyes of, well, everyday Americans or even British people on both sides. And the thing is, this was a kids show. In fact, this show actually did its best to cover history so that way kids can understand of why America broke away from Great Britain. And in fact, it actually did a very good job at it. The problem with the show is it ended very shortly. In fact, it was only on for a said type of time. And the thing is, it covered an extremely amount of fact of history from point A to point B. In fact, it showed historical facts, actually, a lot better than any other History Channel show I have ever seen before. Now, though, there are also many others, so also stay tuned for these. Now, if any of y'all have ever heard of this show, I really would be surprised. This show is known as Shootout. Now, Shootout was a very good show. It did cover history, but it only covered shows, points in history from World War II to the modern day. In fact, it even showed the conflict as we know it as the Northwood-Hollywood shootout in the 1990s, of which was a very massacre type time. And the thing is, it actually did a very good point of actually talking about it with the said people that were there at the time. And the thing is, it did a very good job at it. Now, there is also another show that I did love a lot, which would have been Battles BC. Battles BC was extremely cool because it did actually cover historical facts. In fact, it covered Hannibal. It covered Julius Caesar. It covered pretty much a lot of ancient people before the time of AD. In other words, it technically covered the battles BC. In other words, the type of conflicts that we see with Alexander the Great, Hannibal, or including, it actually even shows the strategy they would have used on the type of fields of battle. And that's actually the really cool part. In fact, they even had the great conflicts between Ramses, or including with during the time of the early Bronze Age, or even late Bronze Age, or even with type of groups with Israelites and such. And in fact, it did a very great job at it. Problem is, since it was Battles BC, you see my point here. But actually, it even talked about the Battle of Thermopylae, and in fact, they did a lot better job at it than the movie 300 did. So yeah, I will leave links down below for y'all if any of y'all have never seen this. Now, there is another type of show called Ancients Behaving Badly. Now, what is this show? Well, I'm glad you asked. This show was extremely cool, and in fact, it actually talked of the behavioral rates of each ancient warrior. In fact, it talked about Hannibal, it talked about Nero, Caligula, and including, it even talked about Julius Caesar, and many other great generals and commanders in history, even Cleopatra. And the thing is, they rate them. In fact, they even talk about all their dids and they did, and all the crimes they did. In fact, it talked about how Nero burned innocent Christians on a stake. It even talked about Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun sacking Rome and such. You see my point here. They actually managed to do a historical fact of why they did this, and the reasons behind it, and of how, well, corrupt they were, and how crazy they were. And that's the thing. That's what the series was about. It was about ancients behaving badly. And the thing is, it did a very good job at it, especially with the animated type forms. But now, let's also get to another show known as Ancient Warriors. Ancient Warriors was an extremely good show. Why? Because it actually talked about ancient type cultures. The samurai, the ninja, the Spartan, the Norman war knight, the Vikings, the Celts. They actually talk about them in a very diverse form, and actually did poetic form into it with the narrator's tongue in it. In fact, it even talked about Brian Boru defeating the Vikings in Dublin and such. It talked about the Scottish Highlanders. It talked about many type of forms of which they don't remember. Of which it even talked about the Aztecs, and that's saying something. And now, for a final series, let me talk about Warriors with Terry Shepard. And now, if none of y'all know who Terry Shepard is, Terry Shepard was an American Green Beret, and I believe it still is. I don't know because I haven't checked up on how much he is. But in the process, it actually is stated that Terry Shepard did talk about this in a very historical form. In fact, he talked about the ancient warriors of history. And here's the thing. He did his best to get involved. He did his best to get involved into it. In fact, he talked about the ancient samurai. He talked about the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest with the Germanic warriors. He talked about Braveheart with William Wallace. He even talked about the last Crusaders during the time of the Siege of Malta. And as well, he did a very good job at it. Surprising fact, though, is that show was only on for one season, but it did a very good job. He even talked about the Greeks at the Battle of Thermopylae, and as well of how they would have fought and how they would have dressed. And in fact, it was a beautiful type of series to its point. Now, don't get me wrong, many of these series are extremely still good, and you can still find them, including some of these movies that are extremely good, and series that are good. I will be leaving links down below for y'all if none of y'all have ever seen them. But yeah, I do love these shows very much as any of y'all. But as well, another type of movie I could even cover also would even have to be the movie The Outlaw King, of which is our most historical type-ish movie I have ever seen, from point A to point B, well, mostly until the very end, but I would have loved to see it at the end if it would have been the Battle of Bannockburn and not something else, but you get my point. The thing is, the movie tries its best, and it did its best, unlike the movie The King. Now, as I said, this is why I want people to understand history a little bit better, because it makes movies and series better, not like what we see today. In fact, most of the time, the only movies and series we understand or see today are the very crappy TV history ones that don't make any sense, and of which, in the process, ruin history. So, guys, before y'all in the process start saying, I just want to watch these bad ones, they sound a lot more better. Here's the thing. Watch the old ones, or including the good ones that I just described, and that way y'all can understand a little bit more of history before you accidentally make a big mistake about it. In fact, here's the thing. The ones I described that were good are extremely great, and these are only scratching the surface of how great they were. In fact, I advise y'all to actually take a look at the links down below to understand them, and as well, most of these might be trailers or something, I know, but at least might get y'all understanding the parts of history. But yeah, hopefully y'all can actually see any of these type of series or films and understand my point, because I want y'all to understand history as much as I do, to understand truth, not fiction that we see in Hollywood. Because if we understand history a little bit better, we can understand our own selves a little better. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching. Hopefully y'all like this episode. If y'all want me to talk about any more about these, let me know down in the comments below. And as well, also check out our Facebook so that way y'all can be notified of what's the next video going to be about. Anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Have a great day.